And good evening, everybody. Welcome here to LakeChelanNow.com. I'm Dennis Rahm at the Chelan Senior Center for tonight's meeting on the North Cascades Ecosystem Grizzly Bear Reintroduction Plan and Draft Environmental Impact Statement. As we have a pretty good group already beginning to gather up here, we'll pan the room a little bit. And folks are still making their way in, so we have not officially begun the program as of yet, but they will be momentarily. Our plan is just to carry the meeting here live in its entirety. And we do want to let you know that right now I have a microphone in our system here that is set up, and you're probably hearing me just fine, but there is no PA system here at the Senior Center for this event tonight. So it may be a little bit of a challenge to capture quality audio for the standpoint of the speakers that will be speaking here. It'll be the County Commissioner, Doug England, will be the first speaker and make the introductions. And we're going to go ahead and set this down and go.
Call the Board of County Commissioners to order. I do want to open up the hearing for Grizzly Bear implementation. First thing I want to do is welcome you all. Thank you for taking the time to come here and listen to what we have to present and then provide your feedback to us. I'll introduce myself and allow my peers to introduce themselves in the areas that they represent. My name is Kevin Overbay. I represent District 1, which is the south part of Chelan County, including the communities of Malaga, Mission Ridge, the Heights, as well as most of the downtown Wenatchee core, and up close to the foothills, all the way from the foothills down to the river.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Boogerts. I'm representing District 2, which is basically the Wenatchee Valley. I serve Leavenworth, Cashmere, Monitor, Peshastin, all the way up in Plain in the Upper Valley, and parts of Wenatchee itself. Thank you for having us tonight.
I'm Doug England. This is my district. We have Lake Chelan, Entiat, and the Summit Slope area.
So to give you a little brief of what we're going to do tonight, we're going to provide some information, and then we're going to ask you, if you wish to speak, to go ahead and sign in if you haven't signed in. Carly has a sign-in sheet, so you can do that back at the table back there. Just mark that yes, you do wish to speak. You will have 3 minutes. Bob will be timing, so he'll let you know when you start coming up on your time so that we can make sure that everybody has a chance to talk that wishes to do so. And we will do that after the presentation. So there are also 4 options back there on the board, so you were probably provided a couple of stickers. And once we go through this and you receive the information on the option, what we're asking you to do is, if you'd be so kind as to put, you have 2 stickers, you can put them on one option, or you can spread your stickers around on that option, whatever you feel is best. So, Mike?
We gave out 1 sticker to each person.
Oh, I'm sorry. We gave out 1 sticker to each person, so you get 1 choice tonight, not 2 choices.
Frugal.
Exactly. So, okay, with that, we'll go ahead and begin. So, Doug, the floor is yours.
Thank you for being here. Again, the purpose of this meeting will just give a brief outline. It doesn't do the full justice to the complete argument for the bear from the draft EIS, but our intent is to just give a brief presentation of that, and then some comments that we had on it, why we opposed this back in 2017, and then we would like to continue forward. There's another all of a sudden open period of public comment, and what we would like to do is get a little feedback from you, whether you feel that we should pursue what we've done before, or whether we should sit this one out. But it does not preclude what you comment. And we have some addresses here for you to make your comment. We will forward the input of this meeting, but that will not do full justice to the comments that you have that you should also send in. So when you look through this EIS, and it's a full book like this, and if you go on their website, you can get the full document. It's very impressive, like some government documents are, but this basically can be watered down and back up for this. And their purpose, stated purpose, is to avoid permanent loss of the grizzly bear in the north central ecosystem, to to restore the ecosystem, to enhance the probability of long-term survival, and to support grizzly bear recovery nationally. So they have 4 alternatives, and that's what's required when they do this. The first is no action. The second option would be to airlift 10 bears to a single site, and they would do this then over the next 60 to 100 years, bring in 200 bears. Their third option would be 5 to 7 bears in multiple sites, but with the same kind of speed. And they said that this B and C may kind of merge together as they proceeded to go forward. The fourth option would be 25 bears in the first year to multiple sites, and then in 25 years they would bring 200 bears in during that period of time. Over 25 years, there would be no limit on the number of bears that they would bring in. And the draft EIS claims that it will improve the tourism business that we have in Southern County, that it's unlikely to affect agriculture or livestock. Bears are unlikely to move outside of the North Cascades ecosystem, and it would improve the habitat of our wilderness areas. Their public input that they have done, they did 6 open houses on areas bordering here. We did not have one here in Chelan. Not included in that 6, I noticed, was an open house that they had in Cashmere. And to kind of explain what they decided they were going to do. They've had news releases. They've had the public release of this should say draft EIS. And they also took a survey. They phone interviewed 600 people throughout the state, and they asked questions like, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? Grizzly bears are a vital part of our national heritage. Efforts to help the grizzly bear population in the U.S. should be science-based and led by experts. Those kind of questions. And they used a overall positive response to indicate that the public wanted them to move forward with grizzly bear introduction. So the legal status of this right now, there is a state law that provides for preserving habitat, but it prohibits the state being involved in introducing bears from anywhere outside of the state. They can move them inside of the state but not outside. However, the feds are using the argument that the Endangered Species Act is used to override state law. And so that's why they're doing what they're doing. So what our position is that this draft EIS is inadequate and outdated. And it makes some of these kind of assumptions. And again, we've been concerned about this for a number of years. This reintroduction, there's not a single word changed from the one that was originally issued. It assumes that over the next 150 years that there's not going to be any change in the population in these 5 counties that are affected. There will be no natural wildfires, there'll be no floods, there'll be no anything there that might affect habitat. Even though the state is required to, in all their programs now, and the Forest Service, to address climate change in all of their decisions, they consider no climate change or temperature change in either temperature or precipitation over that next 150 years, which would change the habitat and the range of those bears. They indicate, and this is just taking a few of the items throughout the draft EIS, that the carrying capacity based on a model we don't feel are realistic. They indicate that the area can support 280 bears, and they're using the indications that a grizzly bear area is only about a little over 10 square miles. Current scientific studies with GPSs indicate that's over 150 miles. Or excuse me, indicate that that's closer to 100 square miles. And so that the location, the size in those ranges is much larger than what they indicate. The current experience that they're having in Montana is that as opposed to resident bears, that introduced bears have been shown to move up to 170 miles. And we've invited shows where that 170 miles would extend. There's no consideration for the significant local impact. We've had numerous meetings with them. We're required by our commitment as county commissioners and state law for the public safety and welfare, and that's what we have to look at. We don't feel that that was addressed within that at all. We pointed that out to them in our meetings, and again, there's not been one word changed. They just keep reintroducing the same draft. They made no considerations of our required comp plans for the Chelan County. Kevin, at a meeting that we had, Commissioner Overbay, in a meeting that we had in Skagit County, extensively testified to that and showed how that did not match the comp plans that they are required, as are we, to follow. And they made the interesting comment in the meeting that we had in Skagit County: any place black bears are found, you should expect grizzly bears. And that would be interesting, as Geber's Cherries up above the Boyd District indicate that they have a resident population of somewhere between 3 and 5 black bears that spend their time in their cherry orchards. Right? From the experience that they're finding in, and my pointer just went, the experience that they're finding in Montana, where there has been a robust recovery of grizzly bears, that they have had to electrify their farms, electrify their houses, their barns. They indicate in the draft EIS that all ag land should expect to require electrified fences. And the way that they indicate that you should avoid the bears wanting to come into the orchard is to pick up all fruit on the ground. There should not be any there. We feel that their decision to, or no calculation for change of population is not supported by the census, not supported by current trends for that. In Montana and Wyoming recovery zones, they are averaging 1 death per year over the last 9 years, and countless injuries. This doesn't count maulings or anything like that. Now, they did an internal, one of the things that's required in this is for them to be able to show that there is a resident population of bears, and we feel, grizzly bears, and we feel that that is totally inadequate. The studies that they show were anecdotal, and they indicate that I think the last sighting of anything that could possibly have been a grizzly bear was in 1996. And our argument is that is almost proof that there aren't resident bears, and just the fact that a grizzly bear happens to travel through the area is not the requirement that needs to be met. So what they did was finance a 3-year study, and in that study that cost over $320,000, they found no indications. These were with little hair traps that they then would use DNA to determine what kind of bears they were. They did not find any bears in the North Cascade ecosystem. They found they had 604 sites. They found 619 black bears, and they had cameras also set up. And all they ever found were black bears, and that's a total number of 4,585 camera nights that they had on theirs. So this is the comment that we feel. The productive uses of this land, ag, tourism, and living will attract grizzly bears into populated areas, and significant human grizzly bear conflicts will occur. There's no discussion in this draft EIS as to whether establishing a population in grizzly bears in this area is essential to the continued survival of the species. There have already been 6 regions that have started it. 4 of those populations are booming in other states. If the introduction of grizzly bear is successful as the wolf introduction, that we feel that we have a concern. So what we've done to date, we had NPS and Wildlife Service came and had a meeting with us where they presented this. We expressed to them some of our concerns and made comments at the time. After that, we had sent a letter of concern in March. We requested a coordination meeting with them, which they are required by the federal government to do. For in April, we requested it in 21st. We were finally granted it in April 24th in 2017. In attendance with the Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service. We were there, Skagit County was there, Snohomish County had a representative, Okanagan County had also a representative, both commissioners, and then the mayor of Darrington was also there. We have met multiple times in Washington DC with the Interior Department, and we were assured that they would listen to the public input before deciding what to do there. Those assurances kind of ring hollow in that we were assured that the project was dead and wouldn't pop up, and so we were rather surprised to see the comment period opened again. We sent a detailed response letter on August 7th. There's a copy of the basic letter there if you want to take one of those copies. There's also the full letter that we sent with all the attachments, and it's about 3/4 of an inch thick, backing up all those things that we said. We think the National Park Service says it best. They are ready to attack their prey at a moment's notice, and you are the prey. So Mike, do you want to go to the next one? I think you have to double tack this. We thought this was interesting from the standpoint it's just two bears interacting. But their argument is that the reason that the grizzly bear isn't here is that it's blocked by roads and a country boundary and a railroad track, and that's why they just don't come here. Our approach is that we feel that option number one of no action, if a grizzly bear decides to come and spend his time here, that's fine. We're just gonna have to live with it. But we feel to transport grizzlies that they feel don't like fish by their statement, don't like cattle, but the way they lure them into their traps in Montana is with fish meal and cattle blood. And they will airlift them in. They expect 2 to 4% mortality just from the travel. These are just two bears, but there's some interesting things to note. The fact that you see where they're fighting, it's in the middle of the road. You also will notice in just a minute when they get all through, and I'm not sure what the big argument is, but it's usually the case. It's like the rule of lug nuts with trucks. The largest lug nut wins. Well, that's kind of ways with grizzly bears, and eventually you'll see that the one that's a little larger will end up winning. But at the end of this display, and one that I did not put on here, is one that if you want to go on a YouTube and watch it, it's a grizzly bear chasing a cow across the road that it eventually attacks and kills. And you can see that the larger one is taking care of probably the younger bear. But you see, as that younger bear takes off, there's a gentleman sitting there in a pickup, and they paid no attention to the fact that there were human beings there. They did all of this in the middle of the road, so we think that their argument doesn't hold much water, that is what's preventing resident bears in our area. We are not anti-bear. A grizzly bear is a magnificent creature. It's part of the national heritage. We feel that it has been recovered in other states. This last weekend, I spent some time with 10 or 12 of my grandkids. They are also marvelous creatures. And I think that we have a problem if we introduce a resident apex predator in our area. They go to where the food is. Now, we have with us tonight a retired biologist that has worked in this area. He's come from Montana and has agreed. He's testified and was present with us at our meeting in Skagit County. He's been very, very helpful with some of our data. Our concern all along is that they're using modeling predictions of what they think will happen. He has experience on the ground in Montana with the recovery of grizzly bear there to kind of indicate what that is. And he's agreed to come over and kind of address for a few minutes some of what he's found with current science and on the ground kind of information. And his name is Paul Fielder. And Paul, would you like to take a few minutes?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Paul Fielder. I was a biologist here in Chelan County for 30 years. I retired in 2006 and now live over in northwestern Montana. As a biologist here, I worked all around Chelan County. I worked for Chelan County PUD, and I did a lot of the spawning surveys on the rivers in the Wenatchee River system and also in the Stehekin Valley. So I know the area pretty well. Right now I live at the southern end of the Yak Cabinet Grizzly Bear Recovery Zone in northwest Montana. I've been working with or against the grizzly bear issue since about 2010. I see what it does as far as the problems it causes and the land use restrictions that will come about if grizzly bears are reestablished here. I helped the county commissioners in 2017. I was over here about a month or so ago and met with the county commissioners to talk about this re-invitation for comments on the same 2017 grizzly bear reintroduction plan. I came over here again today. It's about a 5-hour drive from my place in northwestern Montana. I'm doing this as a volunteer. I'm not being paid. I just see what the problems are, and with my knowledge about what I see in Montana and what I think I would expect to see here in Washington based on my knowledge of the area, it'd be shame on me if I don't share that information with you. You know, they say the watchman on the wall. You know, if you don't blow the trumpet, shame on you. So, I have a 3-page comment letter that I will be sending to the Department of Interior on my comments regarding this plan. And I've got several extra copies, and I'll be happy to share that with you. I got 3 letters from people in Manson, and I don't know how they got my address, but they were commenting on this plan, so maybe some of you are actually here. But I brought in a list of the 3 addresses that you should send your comments to if you want to be most effective. A lot of times people want to chime in and provide public comments, but they're ineffective because they're not doing it right, sending it to the right people. Now, one of the addresses on here is to the Cedro Woolley office of the National Park Service. They're the ones that put out this environmental impact statement and requested the comments. You can send your comments to them. That address is at the bottom. I think in the 2017 release, they got over 200,000 comments. And of course, they get comments from all over the world, from France, England, Europe, Australia, everywhere. And they all count the same as you people that live right here. So, I've also got 2 other addresses for you where your comments will probably be most effective. One is to David Barnhart, who's the Secretary of the Department of Interior in Washington, D.C., and the other is Vice President Pence in Washington, D.C. Those are the addresses where you probably get the most bang for your buck, okay? My wife is a senator in Montana, Senator Jennifer Fielder. She was at a Western Legislative Caucus meeting a month ago, and she was talking to people in the Department of Interior, high-level people. They were not even aware that the Cedro Woolley office had released this document for comments, and they were upset. So, if you send your comments to Washington, D.C., and ask Barnhart and Pence, does President Trump even know that the Department of Interior is trying to reintroduce grizzly bears into Washington State? I'll bet you if they get 20 letters, President Trump's going to find out about it too. So that's where your comments should go. But my comments here, first, there's a law that was passed in Washington that says grizzly bears shall not be reintroduced or relocated into the state of Washington. They're all for managing any grizzly bears that occur here naturally or come across the border naturally, but the law says the grizzly bear shall not be reintroduced. Now, the only agency that can reintroduce and move grizzly bears or other endangered species is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So, if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service say that Endangered Species Act trumps Washington law, who else would that law have been written for? Okay? The 10th Amendment says that all powers delegated to the government by this Constitution, the government has all the powers that this Constitution delegates to it and does not prohibit to the states, right? So, state law should be what's governing this thing. State legislators and your county commissioners have the responsibility for the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service do not have the responsibility for health, safety, and welfare. So, use the law if it's on your side, right? Okay, now, they talk about the alternatives, A, B, C, and D. A alternative is the no-action alternative. Leave it like it is, continue to follow the law. Bears that come into the area naturally will be managed with the state and the federal government. The other three alternatives are basically all the same thing. Establish a population of 200 grizzly bears in central Washington. It's just a matter of how many grizzly bears they bring in at a time till they get to 200. So basically, you're looking at two alternatives, no action and 200 grizzly bears. So they say that the EIS has to meet the need and the purpose, and the purpose is to establish 200 grizzly bears. First of all, I say it'll contribute to the biodiversity of the ecosystem. Biodiversity is basically the number of animals you have there and the number of species. So if you have 5,000 animals and it's all one species, you don't have much biodiversity. If you have 5,000 animals and 1,000 species, you have a wide biodiversity. So you could introduce a salamander and increase your biodiversity just as much as a grizzly bear would. So increasing biodiversity is not a need. A breeding population of 200 grizzly bears does not meet the need of contributing to the benefit and enjoyment of the people. They talk about they have to avoid the permanent loss of a grizzly bear. Commissioner England just talked to you about the hair snag study they did they did. And what that is they put up pieces of barbed wire and they trap and catch pieces of hair and they look at the hair follicles and they can determine from the DNA analysis of that what kind of bear it was, the sex, how old it was, all kinds of things like that. They had 3 years of hair snag studies throughout the best grizzly bear potential habitat in the Cascades, and they found 0 evidence of grizzly bears over a 3-year period. So when they say they want to avoid the permanent loss, I think they've already passed that point. Now they say they want to enhance the probability of survival of the grizzly bear under the Endangered Species Act. If you look at the 1973 definition of endangered species, it says a species in danger of extinction within its range. So what is the range of the grizzly bear? Part of Montana, Idaho, Washington, much of Canada, and Alaska. Is the grizzly bear in danger of extinction within its range? No. So those are some of the flaws in the draft environmental impact statement. Now, the grizzly bear recovery plan, which calls for having a population of grizzly bears in central Washington, is 26 years old. I've helped a number of politicians, mayors, legislators, county commissioners in Montana, Idaho, and Washington petition the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to update their 26-year-old plan, and they have refused to do so far. So they're still dealing under a plan which set population goals and recovery goals that was 26 years old. Science is a lot better now, and the science that they're basing those recovery goals on the science that they're basing their recovery plan on is old. They always say we have to use the best available science. They're not doing that anymore. I can't overemphasize the fact that grizzly bears are dangerous. There's been 8 people killed in Montana and Wyoming alone in the last 8 years. There's been 6 bear attacks so far this fall in Montana alone. So you can look on the internet and you can Google up grizzly bear fatalities attacks. And it gives you a whole listing, where it happened, each one. On my comment list, I just listed the 8 people people that have been killed in the last 9 years in Montana and Wyoming. That doesn't count people that are also attacked and they suffer, broken bones, they're bitten, they're torn up and everything. Grizzly bears tend to grab them by the head when it attacks, and so your skull's crushed and that causes some problems on the inside there. Those don't count on that list because they're not fatalities. They're just maulings. Now, they talk about the grizzly bears that are going to be released in selected sites. And their models are based on grizzly bears that are naturally occurring in their natural home range. Transplanted bears move a lot. We've got bears in Montana that have moved 175 miles from east to west and 150 miles from north to south. So if they planted these grizzly bears, if they want to relocate into the middle of the North Cascade recovery zone, it would extend from Puget Sound to Douglas County as they wander. Because transplanted animals, whether they're grizzly bears, mountain goats, whatever, they tend to move a lot. They don't stay within the area that they've been transplanted to. They've got the documents that shows that. I've got all kinds of maps and from GPS monitoring that they've done, but they don't talk about that when they talk about the EIS. They're using models of natural occurring grizzly bears in their native home range. One of the things that comes about with this is after they put the grizzly bears there, then they start restricting the public access to the public lands, and they restrict private lands, what you can do on private lands. In Montana, they've been closing down roads to protect grizzly bears. Where I live, the Yak Cabinet Grizzly Bear Recovery Zone, there's 23 grizzly bear management units. Each one, supposed to be able to support a certain number of grizzly bears in each unit. Each unit has to have 55% of it non-motorized. No motorized access to essentially 55% of the area where they want to put grizzly bears in. Now, when they count motorized access, they're going to count Highway 2 as motorized access. So that you figure they're going to always leave that there. What they do is they close down all the Forest Service roads and all the other access points out there. And in Montana, we've also got a lot of private lands interspersed, and you do in Washington too, as they do in other places where grizzly bears are. So what they end up doing is having restrictions on the private lands. One of the big problems in Montana is grizzly bears have recovered to such an extent, and of course they can't be delisted because there's constantly challenges in court that we can't delist them even though they're double the recovery goal. So we've got grizzly bears out east of the Rocky Mountains out in the fields, and they're eating wheat fields. They take up residence in cornfields because cornfields have all kinds of great cover and all kinds of great food. Now, grizzly bears are not going to stay on the tops of the mountains in these wilderness areas where they're telling you they're going to release them. Grizzly bears go where the food is. It's a big animal. It's got to put on a lot of weight so it can hibernate and get through the winter. And where do you think grizzly bears in Chelan County and Okanagan County are going to go when they need food? They're going to go to the valley bottoms because you've got salmon and steelhead spawning in the streams there, which is a good attraction. And geez, you also have all kinds of orchards. So where are they going to go to fatten up? They're going to go in those places. And that puts them in conflict with people. I'm going to let, I get on a roll sometimes, and please excuse me. This is a passionate subject for me. I had 5 hours to think of it on the ride over here. And I'm going to stick around. I'll be here until the last person leaves here tonight and somebody locks the door. So you can ask me questions or comment with me afterwards, and I'll help you with your comments. If anybody wants some addresses on where to send your comments to make it most effective, I will not leave here until everybody has one if they want it. And I'm going to leave the rest of the meeting open to you to give your opinion of what you think a population of 200 grizzly bears will be like for you and your kids and your grandkids in north central Washington.
Thank you, Paul.
And I would finish with just the last part of the paragraph in one of the letters that we had sent. As a result, they have emitted significant significant direct and indirect impact on our communities and have not properly analyzed how transplanting 200 grizzlies in the North Cascades would harm our ability to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. And that's one of the charges we're put on. And again, we are not anti-grizzly bear. They're magnificent creatures. We just feel that the plan that they're presenting is flawed in just too many cases.
So at this time, we want to hear from you. We did have the sign-in sheet, so I will go down the sign-in sheet for those folks that indicated that they wanted to speak. If you put question marks, I'll go ahead and call out your name. You can just say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. And what we'll ask you to do is if you could just maybe come up to the podium up here and make that comment. We are actually, this meeting is actually being streamed live right now, and so it's kind of going out for others that could be here. So with that, I'll go ahead and start. Yeah, and there is no microphone, so we'll ask you to speak up. So we'll go ahead and start at the top of the list. First one is Carl Lucas. You can pretend there's a microphone there.
I might start sitting. Members of the board, thank you. I came here to find out what was going on and how to think about it. I'm an animal lover. I just love animals. I believe in preservation and doing the best we can. But I also live in a remote area. I live up First Creek, and it gets remote really quick. And just the other night, I ran a couple bears off, and I screamed and yelled at them. And I can just only imagine if they were 3 or 4 times the size and at 10 times meaner. I do work in the refrigeration business with controls, and some of our customers are in Alaska. And I go up there and listen to all their grizzly bear problems from Kodiak and all around the state up there. So I'm totally against this repopulation, and especially now hearing this information. Yeah, I'm totally opposed to it, and I think from the turnout here, I think some of my neighbors here will agree that we don't need this, especially when government tries to override our state law. We leave it up to our local officials to govern and oversee our safety. And that's about it.
Thank you. Monty?
I wanted to speak. I was hoping there was only 84 people here.
I'd have to say, I'll come right out and say I would support action A, no action. If there hasn't been a grizzly bear seen in this area for 20 plus years, it's kind of like having a truck full of stray dogs and letting them out and see what happens. And so I disagree with this. And then, of course, watching the net today, there was another gentleman just today, Gravelly Mountain, the 4th guy within 9 days that got attacked and mauled today. And this just happened today. Got that off the deal. And I look at it as a safety issue. Nobody, you have the Stehekin Valley and tourist season and everything. So if there were grizzlies to come down there and kill an elk in Buckner Orchard, then Buckner Orchard would be closed for who knows how long until they feel there's no more issues. So, and reading another thing about Yellowstone bears, mid-70s, they had this big Save the Bears, which is wonderful. Had 136 bears, and their goal was to bring that number up to 500. Well, that number is now 700. So and then they just said, well, the number was too low. And we're talking about the recovery plan. I was reading the map today, and it says that recovery area goes all the way down to I-90, which is pretty far down. So I disagree with having grizzly bears all the way down to I-90. And about the railroad tracks, I ran trains for 41 years, and I can tell you that tracks don't stop anything. In Montana, they get their share of grizzly bear deaths right on the tracks, and they might be eating a deer that got hit the day before or whatever, so that's not a deterrent. And lastly, I would say, well, one more thing is that law about the not transplanting bears, outside the state. That was, I looked it up, and it's RCW 77.12.035, and I read it, and it pretty much says don't bring anything out, from outside. And lastly, I would say that I look at this all kind of like a Trojan horse as far as property and using lands that kind of a way to take over those lands and push us out and use the bear kind of like reading different things. My mom, she lives over in Thurston County. Their deal is the Mazama gopher, and you got to go through quite a number of items if you want to do anything on your own land. And back east, they have the great bats, and this bat, and this bat. So it's just what everything all ties into. If you look at, when you hear the word sustainable, it's kind of like nails on a chalkboard. Anytime I hear the word sustainable, it all has kind of like yeast and bread is this UN. They came out in 2015 with these 17 goals that the world's going to all of a sudden be a wonderful place and we give up our sovereignty. All this stuff is tied in with the Department of Interior. It's all basically wrote out in UN goal number 15 for 2030. So if you read what the Department of Interior has to say about these lands and recovery and this and that, it's basically just paraphrasing what the UN has to say, which I'm not a big fan of. So that's it.
Thank you. Tom Watson.
You have very thoroughly answered almost all of my questions. I would like to point out, though, that if this happens, if the grizzly bear are brought back in here, we're going to end up with exactly the same problem they have in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, wherever they are, and the same problem we have with the wolves. We've met our criteria for delisting the wolves. Well, what do? They go into court and they say, "Oh no, that's not enough. That's not enough." There is a group of people that will do this on wolves, on anything, on bears, on anything that they possibly can to keep it going. Now, why they want to do this is a really big question. I have a question for the biologist. How are they going to get enough food to survive the winter? Now, in Alaska, I worked in Alaska. In Alaska, you've got tremendous fish runs, and the bears do just fine, thank you. But how are they going to survive down here? There's, what are they going to eat? Number one, they're going to eat deer. Bears are really good at getting fawns. That was proved about 40 years ago in Idaho, where they trapped a lot of bear out just to see what would happen to the elk. And the number of calf elk doubled in 1 year. So the bears are really good at that. So there's going to be a food problem as far as the bear are concerned. They aren't going to be able to stay where they're at. They're going to have to go someplace else, specifically down in the Chelan Valley and the Eniat Valley, in the Wenatchee Valley. That's the only place they can go to get food. The other problem that you used to have in Yellowstone was garbage dumps. Now, I don't know how many, I honestly don't have a clue how many places have garbage dumps anymore. Maybe none. I know we don't in Chelan anymore. I mean, it's a transfer station, but they used to have tremendous bear problems because they would all congregate at garbage dumps. And if there's a place where they can get food, they're going to go there. Can they find enough food to eat to survive the winter?
Question was, can the grizzly bears find enough food in Washington to survive the winter? Obviously they do in Montana and Wyoming and Idaho where they live, but grizzly bears go to where the food is. And they rely on berry crops, fruit crops a lot in the fall because they're able to reconvert those sugars in the fruits into storage fat. So that helps them. So they're going to go where the food is. They're going to go to orchards, just like black bears go to orchards. They're going to go to salmon spawning streams. They're going to eat up any kokanee that might be spawning in the Stehekin River, the Blackberry Creek, Company Creek, the Wenatchee River, and all those tributaries. They're going to go to where food is. They're going to go to wheat fields, cornfields, if there are any. They're going to go to agricultural places. They love chickens. Anybody that's got chickens around is going to find grizzly bears. Love them. Beehives, you probably use a lot of bees for pollination of your orchards and stuff like that. On the west side, they got agricultural crops along I-90 as you go north from Seattle up into the Everett area and all that area there. So they're going to go to where there's vegetable crops, and I think they also grow a lot of lilies over there too, so they like root tubers too. Grizzly bears will find food. It might not be where they're transplanted to, but they'll go to where the food is.
Another question I have is, where exactly is the zone that they're talking about putting grizzlies into? What, north of the North Cascades Highway and from the crest to Idaho? Where is it?
I've got a map of the recovery zone right here. It's from their environmental impact statement. As you can see, this is Puget Sound here. This is the Columbia River over here. So it goes from almost the Columbia River to almost Puget Sound, from the Canadian border down to Clay Ellen.
Good Lord.
Of course, that's where the recovery zone is. They'll probably be transplanting them somewhere in the North Cascades National Park area and letting them disperse from there.
I think the biggest problem we're gonna have is that if this happens, we're gonna have exactly the same problem we have with the wolves. We have a recovered wolf population, but that isn't good enough. They want more of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel Canterbury.
Thanks, Kevin. I want to stand right here and talk. I think
That's
everybody in
perfect,
this room can hear me. I don't have any problem speaking. I'm a landowner. The wife and I are in the upper Boyd district. And we have a cherry orchard. When I had planted apples, I didn't have any trouble with bears, but I do now. In fact, we got one that comes within 50 yards of the house. I don't know how you feel about that, but I really don't like it. And when I called the local game department and asked them to come and get them out of my orchard so we could pick the fruit, you know what the response was? Quote unquote, if you live in bear country, get used to it. Now, how do you like that? If the game department's telling me that, what do you think these other groups are gonna tell me? I'm very upset about it. We have a bear that's in there right now. He's probably at the orchard as I'm speaking. That puppy broke off a tree that was over 3 inches in diameter, broke it off at ground level. Now, if I being a landowner, I make money off of that orchard, because I'm not in it for my health, even though it does support me. But you know what, folks? You want to be careful what you wish for, because I didn't have any problems until I planted cherries, and now I got them. We had 7 bear in that orchard in 1 year. We couldn't get them out of there. There was only one way to do it, and that's kill them. And I'm a hunter. I love to hunt, and I hunt with a bow. But I do not want to kill them out of season. That's against my grain. But I had to in order to survive. Is that what you want to do? Along with the gentleman that spoke here, the biologist, and I really enjoyed his talk. I have friends that live in the Wind River country of Wyoming. Him and his wife, he works for the county. He takes care of the wheat program on the roads. He and his wife never let their children outside the house unless they're with them, and they both pack guns, 44 Magnums. Is that what you want to do? I don't. He carries a loaded shotgun in his vehicle at work 24/7 to protect himself. I don't want to live that way. We lived that way in the 1800s and the early 1900s. And you know what? I'm really upset when they tell me that the grizzly bear was here, because there's no evidence of it. And I think, and I'm an Indian, the American Indian was here first. And when we came west, we pretty near put them on the endangered species list. So their theory of what was here first doesn't fly, not with me. Thank you very much. Thank
you. Sue Lesmeister.
No, I wasn't going to speak.
Okay.
I'll take her place.
Okay. Yep. Carl Davis?
Yeah.
You're next.
Okay, well, I spent 20 years of my career in Montana on the, just north of Yellowstone. And I was involved with the grizzly bear recovery in Montana. I did respond to the initial NEPA document, and I spent 20 years of my career working in NEPA documents. I find that the document has a lot of shortcomings. One is they didn't disclose an issue that likely the most affected part of this will be the dispersed backcountry recreation. They also failed to even acknowledge the PCT trail that brings in a lot of different folks. And those folks have no idea how to deal with bears or how to act around bears. I wrote a 6-page letter to the park superintendent and got no response. Another issue I feel is very much lacking in their NEPA document is the point about liability. Alternative A, liability is not an issue. But in B, C, and D, it is, because they're bringing in an animal that action could ultimately end up with a liability. But they failed to acknowledge liability. The other thing that they didn't do in the NEPA document or the draft was to talk about long-term effects. They all talked about the primary goal of recovering the bear, which was the augmentation process. They failed to get in to discussions about what happens if the bear is recovered. They failed to do that. So they did not meet the intent of the NEPA process by not disclosing long-term effects. Another item that they failed to acknowledge was the cost. And these are requirements. The liability, the issues, the costs are all requirements of the NEPA process, and they failed to do that. More than likely, each bear that they bring in here, if you think about labor, transportation costs, is going to cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. And I agree with Mr. Fielder, having personal knowledge of trapping grizzly bears. We had a situation on the district I worked at where a grizzly got into sheep, killed 5. We trapped the bear, brought in the Fish and Wildlife Service, relocated this bear to the extreme southwest corner of Yellowstone National Park, a distance of about 300 air miles. That bear made it back to the site where the bears were, where he killed the sheep, within 6 days. And not only that, but he brought 2 other grizzlies with him to clean up the mess. So I think the NEPA document, and I don't know if there's any Park Service people here tonight, probably not. But I sense that the NEPA process was just a formality they went through, and they did not actually abide by the NEPA process, because those folks, was it 2,000 respondees, their comment should have been evaluated and, if appropriate, included into the draft, another draft. And if the commissioners say that draft was the same as initiated in 2017, then they've not made that connection. And that's a failure of the NEPA process as well. So I just want to leave you with this thought. Having worked in NEPA for 20 years and knowing the Park Service as I do from Yellowstone National Park, this decision has already been made. They're just going through the formality of the NEPA process, which they have failed to enact the intent of the NEPA process. They failed in that process. But believe me, they've made the decision. So if this process tonight can help, then that's good. Having had the experience of 3 charges from grizzly bears, it's not a welcoming experience. And I've had members of my crew quit because they could not handle the stress. So basically, I'm saying that the NEPA document, the draft that they've initiated, has not made the intent of the NEPA process. My own personal feelings about grizzly bears is that around Yellowstone ecosystem, it's fine. But I agree that the relocation sites, and Park Creek is one of them, which is a tributary of the Stehekin River. The North Cascades are a glaciated system, which means you have big U-shaped valleys and jagged peaks. those bears are gonna be relocated in the same drainage that, where the transportation system is and the trail system. So you're overlapping the augmentation sites right on the sites where people use. So the possibility of human bear contacts is probably fairly high. They acknowledged in their draft that it would be low. And what does low mean? They failed to acknowledge that. So anyway, that's all my point. Thank you.
Okay, Tom Clark?
Could you put mine on alternative billing? Thank you.
My name is Thomas Lee Clark, and I've had the opportunity to travel a lot in forested areas of Washington State, and I have come into contact with grizzly bears in the Satan wilderness, have been stalked by one, and later stalked that particular bear. Early in the spring of 2015, I observed a mother grizzly bear with 2 cubs 5.5 miles up Antwine Creek Road, close to my home. And I have enough trouble with black bears. I have all manner of soft fruit and have all manner of problems with bears and even walnuts. I've had years where I didn't get any walnuts because the bears ate them all. But there's an issue that may seem to be off topic, but if these grizzly bears are placed in our ecosystem, they're going to further diminish the number of Chinook salmon that are available in the Pacific Ocean for the orcas that are starving. And because they're starving, it impacts their reproduction. They stop reproducing because the Chinook salmon is their basic food source. Sea lions, California sea lions, are coming up, have been for a long time, coming up the Columbia River, and they wait at the mouth of the Columbia River for the Chinook salmon that are going to go up the river to spawn. They wait there for them, and then they follow them up the river. They have learned to climb the fish ladders. So right now there's a plan to kill 1,100 sea lions because of the shortage of the stock of Chinook salmon. If these grizzlies are reintroduced, they for sure will eat salmon. They will eat any protein source that they can find, any fruit source that they can find. I have black bears that for 3 years in a row, I didn't get any sweet corn because the night before I was going to pick the sweet corn, the bears came in and ate it all. So if I had to put up with grizzly bears, I will probably revert to what the acronym that Montana sheepmen and cattlemen relied on.
1 minute.
Okay. Relied on in treatment of grizzly bears that were killing their livestock. It's SSS. Shoot, show, and shut up. And so I'll shut up.
Katie Turner?
Hello, thank you for this information meeting. It's very informative. I am not for the reintroduction or introduction of grizzly bears into the North Cascades. It's very close to the communities of Sahican and Holden Village, which is a place that I spent a couple years at, and it would change the experience for those people up lake for sure. And it's very close. I believe it would be also detrimental to the bears. I am a lover of nature and wildlife, and I just think we're kind of sending them to their death trap. I attended the meeting at the library, and the person there said that if they went outside the line, because they'll be wearing collars, the bears will be, that they would be put down. And I'm like, well, you know, you're just like sending them, you know, to their death trap doing that. And he also said, when I asked him how it would impact the communities up lake, he said, well, you would deal with the grizzly the same way that you would deal with a black bear. And I found that very irresponsible and a little bit disconcerting because, and this was a representative from the NPCA, because I don't think that's true. And you know, what he was telling me was that it was okay to defend myself with bear spray against a grizzly. And you know, I don't want to find out if that's true. I, you know, have seen the recent discussions about, or the recent news articles about the people that have been harmed in Montana, and some of those were hunters. I assume that means they had a gun or something to that effect, you know. And if they were attacked, you know, not able to defend themselves with that, you know, then why are they telling people that, you know, it's okay to have just bear spray up in the backcountry, up in, you know, the North Cascades? I think that's all I have, so thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth Newkirk?
Yeah, I'm Ken Newkirk, and I moved into this area about 3 years ago, but I've lived in Washington most of my life. I've known people that have encountered grizzly bear in Dizitel and Nez Pelham areas, and they've all said they had to steer clear of them, and the black bears helped them to stay safe because the black bear recognized that the grizzly was going to attack people, and the black bear actually defended the people because they were providing the food for the black bear. So the black bear was defending its food source against grizzly bear. These are rare occurrences, and they do not happen because we do not have a native grizzly bear population, but they do travel extensively. I've known personally of bears that have come down from Canada and have ended up in the backyard of a friend of mine in Yakima. So don't tell me they don't travel, because they do. And they go where the food is. They will follow it relentlessly. They do not back down. They are very aggressive, and they will defend their food source against anything. And if you're a food source, it doesn't make any difference to them. I don't know anybody that has gone up against a grizzly and lived. And I've lost a couple friends because of it. But the grizzly bears that came in were not native. And when they went to find them, they had already left out of the area, and they failed to track them any further. Even the Indian population in Nez Pelham will avoid grizzly bear as much as possible. They do not hunt them, they do not pursue them, they steer clear. And some of them will definitely report what they find, where they see them, and there's nobody that will go in that area. And if they're transplanted here into this area, we're going to run into the same problems, if not worse, because these bears will not back down. And it is true. The tactics that will work with a black bear will not work with a grizzly because of the way they are ingrained in the way they operate. And I don't want to take the chance. I would definitely appreciate the time and the effort that's being made, and I hope it makes a dent and somebody is willing to listen and take what is being said to heart, and definitely get this program completely vacated because it's a bad idea from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. James Bradley?
Yeah,
I'm James Bradley, and I've lived around the Manson, Chelan, Wenatchee area for over 50 years. Right now I live in the Varcooley. I have bear, cougar, all kinds of animals in my backyard. And I know for a fact that grizzly bears, because like I say, I'm a hunter, have been for all my life. And what I've known and read about them, they don't really have a boundary. They will go, they don't even have an enemy other than a human being. So me, I'm completely against bringing them in anywhere for Washington State. Because I know, like the other people says, they will go to the food chain. They don't care if it's human, animals, fish, or what have you. And one gentleman brought up about the sea lions and stuff, about eating all the fish and all the other things, but they forgot to leave out one of the main important things that eat up a lot of our fish and everything, that is a food source for the bears. And that's the merganser's duck. Should be put on a year-round hunting season and eliminated because all they are is a fish-eating machine. And when I grew up as a kid, very seldom you ever seen one because it was eliminated. Now you see them all over Lake Chelan. You see them all up and down the Columbia River. But that's just getting off the track about the grizzlies. To me, I've never come in contact with a grizzly except in Yellowstone. And I've seen them off the side of the roads when I take my kids. I've went through Yellowstone a few times. And all my wildlife stuff that I see on TV, no. They're a feared animal. They got no fear of anything. And I don't think pepper spray, as far as I'm concerned, would do them any good. You know, so that's what my opinion on the grizzly bears. I don't know who thought up the idea about bringing back the ecosystem. But bringing back the grizzlies into our area is no good for our economy, for anybody going into the wildlife. And I'll make one statement that is not have to do with the grizzlies, and that's the reintroducing of the wolves, because they took out 80% of our elk, as far as I'm concerned, and left the people without a food supply because the wolves had taken them out. I've had wolves taken pictures of just above my house, and they've also taken them out over in Aniad and over into the Kashmir Valley. So that's what I've got to say. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. So that completes the list of the folks that said that they would like to speak. I do want to offer up an opportunity for other folks to come up if you didn't have a chance to sign up, or if you changed your mind and do want to provide comment. So I'll just ask you to go ahead and raise your hand, and as I call you, if you'll come up to the microphone, state your name, please keep it to 3 minutes. And I'll start on this side of the room. So sir, you in the back, if you would like to come up, please introduce yourself for the record.
Yeah, I thought I did sign up, actually. My name's Ed Eisenhardt. I live in Chelan, and to begin with, I don't really like the idea of a government agency messing with the ecosystem, because we've seen how well that's worked out for Lake Chelan. And my wife's family has a cabin outside of West Yellowstone, Montana, and it's about 5 miles outside of West. And she spent a lot of time up there as a kid, and summers up there. And they always used to go to the dump to watch the grizzlies. They used to have an open dump outside of West Yellowstone. And they'd go up there to dump their trash. And there was always 4 or 5 grizzlies rooting around in the garbage dump to get food. So you're right, they follow the food source. Anywhere there's a dumpster, you may find a grizzly bear. And they had, one night while her aunt and cousin were staying at the cabin, they had a grizzly bear come through one of the cabin windows, get a hold of the refrigerator, knocked it over on its face, and then tried to tear his way in through the back end of the refrigerator. My wife's aunt and cousin ran out the back door, jumped in the car, and drove to town. The same bear came back the next night again. The Forest Service, I think, finally trapped the bear. I think eventually they had to euthanize the bear because the bear just kept coming back. It liked the food source it was finding in the vacation cabins along Hebgen Lake there, and so it would keep coming back. We used to camp a lot and hike in the Cascades. We hiked in the Olympics and up off of the Icicle and Stevens Pass, and it was a lot of fun. We had 2 kids, and we'd go out for the weekend. And so one summer we were going up to West Yellowstone to stay for a week or so at the cabin, and I packed all of our hiking and camping gear. Thought we'd go for a hike in Yellowstone Park. That would be really a lot of fun. There's a lake, Lewis Lake, that my wife's grandfather was Lewis M. Lewis. She always thought it was named after him. And so we thought we'd hike into Lewis Lake and spend a couple of nights there. So I stopped at the ranger station on the way in to the park there at West Yellowstone, and went in and talked to the ranger. And he explained to me that if we wanted to camp at Lewis Lake, we really needed to have 2 campsites. We had to have one campsite where we kept our food and where we cooked and ate. And then we needed to have another campsite like 50, 100 feet away, maybe more, I don't remember exactly the distance. But that's where we slept. And before we went over into that campsite to go to bed and go to sleep, we needed to change clothes and get out of the clothes that we'd eaten in and cooked in, and change into clothes that had no food, that had no food smells on them, to sleep in the cabin. Yeah?
1 minute to go.
Oh, okay. Didn't know there was a limit. At that point, I decided we weren't going to go camping in West Yellowstone. I didn't want to endanger my kids like that, and so I just bagged it, and we never went camping there. But I would definitely support option A. I don't think we need grizzly bears around here. If they do want to transplant some grizzly bears, I would suggest that there's some really nice forested areas around Olympia and on Mercer Island, and maybe they ought to start there and see how that works out, and then maybe we can try it here.
So I was provided a sheet that Mr. Eisenhart, your name was actually on it, so it was just brought to me. So I actually have 2 others here that did say yes, and then I will go ahead and call on those that did not have a chance to sign up or change their mind or wanted to comment. So Art Campbell. Just a reminder, we're asking for 3 minutes.
Hey there, come and get me. Here I am. You know, I really can't imagine anything more terrifying than hiking down a trail and rounding a corner and startling a mother grizzly and 2 cubs. I have, for my defense, my bear bell and some bear spray. That's it. There are thousands of hikers in the North Cascades. Day hiking, backpacking, PCT trail. To introduce grizzly into the North Cascades is absolutely insane. Don't do it. I'm very much opposed to it. Thank you.
Gary Pirro.
Excuse me, my name is Gary Pirro. I was raised here in Chelan, lived here pretty much my whole life, and we've always been outdoor people, hunting, fishing, enjoying the outdoors. And like Art says, we have people all over the state that backpack and hunt and fish up in the mountains, in the streams. And I went online, I didn't know about this meeting, I went online to see what they had to say about the pluses for introducing bears, and people said, well, it makes you more aware of the outdoors and makes the mountains seem beautiful and makes the streams more gorgeous and makes the stars prettier. They actually write that. And but I had it said, should you take a dog with you when you go in the mountains if they're bears? And the bottom line was the dog might go after the bear is going to go after him, and he'll come right back to you. And I've actually had that happen to me with a black bear. When my dog started chasing a bear, turned out to be a mama with a cub, and she came after the dog, and the dog ran right straight back to me. If that was a grizzly bear, it might be a different story. I do know a guy up in Alaska who was hunting out of Sitka, and he was up on a mountain, killed a deer, he gutted it, and he was starting to drag it down the mountain. He was attacked by a grizzly. The grizzly mauled him, tore right through his leg. He nearly bled to death. He didn't die, but that's what all of us hunt and fish. These are risks that we would be exposed to all the time. I'm totally against grizzly.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll open it up for those folks that wish to speak. Sir, go ahead. And if you'll just please state your name for the record, and we have a 3-minute time limit. So Commissioner Booger will give you a finger up here like this. Let you know you have one finger. This finger right here. Let you know.
I'm Wayne Baker, and I live in Chelan, and I think probably this is the reason, this project, and this is the reason why the Upper Sabine River has been put on hold to not reopen. It's part of this plan. And I think that, it's been approved, but the Park Service will not implement it. And this is the reason why they want the upper 12 miles for this program. And I think about having done a lot of hiking above Stahika myself until very recently, that these Pacific Crest Trail hikers are going to be the main source of food for these because they're carrying food. When I backpack, I have a bear canister, and I think black bears can't manage them, but I think a grizzly bear would probably just crush that thing. I just can't imagine them not doing it. But anyway, I'm opposed to the grizzly bears as a longtime hiker and backpacker, and that's my statement.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Sam Warner. I've been a resident of Chelan for 6 years. I am a long distance hiker, and I have been home 1 week. I went out and hiked 300 miles of the Continental Divide Trail, and my section was from the Winds to Yellowstone. I had the pleasure of going into Du Bois. Du Bois is one of the supply stops that hikers go into. A day and a half before Du Bois, we ran into some hunters. It's archery season now, and they told us to be careful of the bears, grizzlies. It was within that day we started seeing tracks and scat. Got into Du Bois, and the rumor was that 20 years ago they started implanting bears into this area, and now there's over 500 bears there. Du Bois has an issue with grizzlies right now. Fish and Game had just taken out a 600 or 700 pound grizzly because it was killing the cows. There has been 2 killings. There's been a biologist that was mauled last year. The thought of bears and hikers, I have 20,000 miles logged on my feet. I've hiked a lot. And it was the most nerve-wracking thing I think I've ever gone through. I had no idea that I was going into such a populated area of grizzlies. I had my bear spray, I had my bear bell. But I don't think it's a good mix, especially on the PCT. I've seen black bear, I've hiked in Glacier National Park, I've seen grizzly, but being out there and having the hunters tell you to be careful, and they were actually telling me what drainages these grizzlies were in. It was scary. It was very, very scary. And as far as the cows, or the grizzlies, we were seeing pieces of cows. We were seeing the elk dead elk that had been fed on. One of the locals told us that the problem with the grizzly introduction was other wildlife has moved out. The moose in Du Bois, a lot of the elk and a lot of the deer have gone. And then also walking around town in Du Bois, everyone's carrying a sidearm. I don't want to live that way. So thanks for your information.
Anybody else? Kind of moving across the room this way.
My name is Christina Major, and last year my sister up in Manson, way up on Ivan Morse Road, she's kind of near the end of it. They had a problem with a bear coming into the orchard like several times where they actually had to shoot the bear. And I'm not sure what happened after that, but they shot the bear and ended bear. But there were areas that Ken has gone hunting in I think it was either Spokane or Idaho, and they had problems with bears. They had to lock their garbages up. I'm not even sure how exactly, but we saw all these garbage cans that were supposed to be bear resistant and locked up under padlocks. I don't think that's how we want to do this, and I do not think we should have grizzly bears in this area, at least not brought in. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
My name's Tim Hollingsworth. I do a lot of hiking. Spent a lot of time in the Sawtooth Mountains. Not so much up in the park, just because it's the park and there's too many regulations. But I do love it up there, and I think one of my observations is when you get up into that high country.
It turns out that
I need to stand over here.
Yeah,
you
I'm
come
sorry,
over
I
here.
should have mentioned that.
Okay.
to the other folks. Thanks, Tim.
Sorry.
They have a microphone for the live stream, so they want to be
Yeah.
able to hear what you're saying.
So I just think the ecosystem of the North Cascades, when you look at where they want to introduce these things in the park, I'm not sure I see how that's going to sustain large bears. It's not like the broad valleys of the Rocky Mountains. It's very lean countryside, and they're going to move into the lower valleys, and it's far more populated here than it is in Montana, both on this side of the mountains and on the other side. And the other thing I wanted to make, I've got the mission statement for the North Cascades National Park is to preserve the certain mountain scenery, snowfields, glaciers, alpine meadows, lakes, and other unique glaciated features for the benefit, use, and inspiration of the present and future generations. So that's the mission of the park. I mean, it doesn't say future generations of bears. And I think that, as has been alluded here, the conflict between bears and people is going to require that large areas of the park be closed. I think we already see that with black bears, which are far less threatening. So, given that, and that's just kind of repeating what a lot of other people have said, I think one of the things that you folks need to do, and we as a community need to start figuring it out, because I suspect Carl Davis is right. I think, they've come up with what they want to do, and now they're trying to justify it. We need to start thinking about what's the next step when they decide they're going to start flying grizzly bears in here. Where do we go from there? So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
3 minutes. 3 minutes. I know, right? Cliff Courtney, Stehekin. So, my brother asked me one time, what happened to the dinosaur? And I said, well, I'm not sure. I've heard some theories. I said, what do you think? He said, I think they turned him over to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to manage. So, we did take this area by conquest. And I think we have some regrets. We took it from the tribes. Maybe we took it from some wolves.
perhaps from some grizzly bears. But since then, we've come a long way down the road of making it habitable for humans. And whenever we sell a new wilderness or a new park or set aside a new area, we placate everybody by telling them that it's going to be for their benefit and their enjoyment. And I think Hollingsworth had a point there. I think we need to balance that a little bit with this plan. And what they're proposing to do, I believe, is not legal. In this state, federal government can have jurisdiction. They can either have exclusive, like some of the parks, or they can have concurrent, or they can have proprietary jurisdiction, which is the same jurisdiction I would have as a big landowner. That's what they have in the North Cascades. They pretend like they have exclusive. They do not. They do not have a right to override state law when they have proprietary jurisdiction, any more than they had the right to do it when they killed all the fish in our mountain lakes, which incidentally were put there for public use and enjoyment as well. So I think that's a big part of what we're facing today and how we need to face them. What they're doing is not only as a bad neighbor, but it's also illegal. The other thing they've tried to prove is that there was a grizzly bear in this area and the whole ecosystem. And I do admit there were grizzly bears at certain times in histories and part of this ecosystem. And I also believe that there's been rare sightings far into this ecosystem, even into the Stehekin Valley, but that doesn't mean they actually reside there or choose to reside there. They prefer to call them ghost bears now because they can't find one. You're kidding, 2 minutes already? I got this huge list here. All right. So they can't propose to pretend like we have that same ecosystem we had 150 years ago. We've come a long way down the path for humans to be able to actually utilize and live in this part of the country. So what I don't think they ought to do at this point is introduce grizzlies into this system. I don't think they've also taken into account how nature heals and fills any vacuum if it's changed. If a group did kill out the grizzly bears, whether it was the Native Americans or the Hudson Bay Company, black bears fulfill everything ecologically that they say the grizzly bears are going to be this great missing link that fulfill all of this niche. The black bears do fine, and there's a prolific population. They're also not honest about what they will do if they have any problems. They pretend now like they're going to listen to the community, that they will deal with the grizzly and get rid of it if it's a problem. No, they'll close trails, they'll close whole drainages to the exclusion of humans. So certainly alternative A, let nature run its course. And it's a real bad idea. We're a tourist county. Our tourism is how Stehekin survives. You can't expect me to start educating every day hiker on how to carry bells, always hike with a group, train them how to use pepper spray. That's not reasonable. They will simply stop coming. And so it's not all about the dollar, but the balance is simply not there at this time. And I really don't believe that this group is behind this is pro-bear or pro-environment. I think they're anti-human. That's the real problem. And just like the book, we talked about Yellowstone a lot. There's a book called Playing God in Yellowstone. I think they're trying to play God in the North Cascades, and I think we ought to call their hand. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Usually what you do is you wait 8 seconds, and then if there's nobody, then you close it out. And I know that Paul does, but anybody else before Paul jumps in? Okay. And Paul, if you could tell them about the thing as well.
About the alternatives?
Alternatives.
Put your stickers on which alternative you think you want to do.
Yep.
Don't forget to do that before you leave. Don't forget to stop and take some addresses from me and where your comments will do the most good. I'd like to take my 3 minutes, like everybody else, and respond to a couple of things that came up from your comments here. One was trails. We talk about a lot of hiking. Right now in the Cabinet Yaak area where I'm, the grizzly bear zone that I live next to, they're talking about closing a portion of one of the major trails hiking there, I don't know which one it is, because it goes through grizzly bear habitat and they don't want the people on the trail to bother the grizzly bears. So they're talking about closing major trails like the North Cascades Trail or the Continental Divide Trail. Another thing, they talk about bear spray. Bear spray has an expiration date on it. I don't know if you know that. So you gotta look at it and see when it expires, because then you gotta buy another one of those expensive cans. And also, in order to have bear spray be effective, you gotta carry it on the outside of you so you can draw it like a gun, right? But bear spray doesn't work at cold temperatures. So if you're hunting during cold temperatures and you go to squirt this bear spray out, it's like one of those squirt, you know, the kids play with, you know, it sort of squirts out a stream of goo. Now, you use bear spray so you don't surprise a bear, right? So if you're walking along and the wind is blowing from you to the bear, he's going to smell you, right? But if the wind is blowing from the bear to you, that's when you surprise him. And you take out your bear spray and you go like this, and where's that wind blow that bear spray? Right at you, right? So bear spray is not foolproof by any means. They don't tell you that it works 90 to 95% of the time. I know 3 people personally that had to shoot bears that were coming at them, and the bears dropped from me to you. So, also, they don't talk about the boars area. Now that's bears outside the recovery zone, because they had this grizzly bear recovery zone, but then they also set up a buffer zone around it, which is called the boars area. And that's managed with the same regulations and restrictions as what's in the recovery zone. So essentially, it's a bigger recovery zone. It takes care of more land restrictions for you. And also, I talked about mortalities from bears. Wyoming's got 6 people per square mile. Montana's got 7 people per square mile. Last time I looked, Washington had over 33 people per square mile. Now, most of those are in the cities. But in the EIS, they've got a map in there of their own EIS. And it shows the North Cascades complex. It's got I counted them exactly 200 campsites within that area that they're going to be releasing grizzly bears into. So I wanted to talk about your trails, because they're going to be closed down if they conflict with grizzly bears. And also the bear spray. Be careful of that. Do some research on bear spray before you trust your life to it.
I'm going to wait another 8 seconds. Is anybody else available that wants to speak? That was a quick 8 seconds. So with that being said, what I will do is I'll open up a short segment here. If you have any questions you would like to ask Paul, we're going to make Paul available to do a Q&A. So we'll kind of keep that to about 10-minute Q&A. Just ask one question if you can, get the answer, and we'll move on to the next. Go ahead.
As far as trails, we're talking national scenic trails, trails that are protected by law also. How can they shut these down? I mean, the PCT, if this does happen, or the Continental Divide Trail, how can this happen?
By whatever mechanism they can use, I guess. I guess maybe they're using the Endangered Species Act. It's the trail in the Yak Cabinet area up by Yak, Montana. You can look it up on Google because there was just an article about it in the last week.
Yes, sir.
Just a comment. My name is John Haggerty. All of the comments tonight really have gone to the question of whether or not it's a good idea. Totally different question from whether or not it's going to be done. And as our biologist observed, I think they seem to have made up their mind, and they're probably going to do it anyway, or try to. And based on the fact that they have changed the EIS with the inputs that have already been made. Therefore, it's important for you and the others that are in your shoes to figure out in advance when they're going to attempt to do it and begin the legal proceedings that will be necessary to stop it. You beat something like this, since they don't care about the merits, you beat something like this by beating them on the technicalities. Way better to have a case dismissed for lack of merit by a judge than to try the damn thing for 3 or 4 weeks on the facts. Facts are messy. The law is fairly clear, and it seems very clear that they have ignored the law, and that's the drum you should be beating on when you're going into challenge.
And he knows what he's talking about. He's a lawyer.
Not anymore.
In response to your question, I do not believe, with my political connections, my wife has some very strong political connections, and she's been carrying the water for Chelan County on this with some of her meetings with national legislators out of Washington, D.C., and from those offices, top-level people. people really connected to the Department of Interior. I do not believe that the people in Washington, D.C. know what the people in Central Woolley are doing here. And that's why I said I've got the addresses for Vice President Pence and the Secretary of the Department of Interior. And you can use all the biological arguments you want, and that isn't going to make any difference here. Biology, we know we win. It's got to be won politically. So if you ask these two people if President Trump even knows about this idea of reintroducing 200 grizzly bear population into central Washington, that's where you're going to make your difference. That's where your letters are going to be most effective. And that's where I'm sending my letters.
We're going to ask Mike to put those on the back table.
Yeah,
put them on the back
table so when you need, if you want to pick them up.
So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I'm Roy Walker, some of you know me, some don't hate. My family, the Harans, have lived in this area, Wenatchee, and up in here in Chelan, and I've lived here for over 25 years. I've never gone bear hunting. I've never been able to do that. I've always wanted to. But something very basic and true is if they introduce, like they say, an apex, bear in here, I mean, it is fairly common knowledge that they're going to go where the food is, they're going to come into the populated areas, and number one, why are they wanting to do this other than to grab land? And two, on whose authority do they get to designate and start this? Just saying, we're going to do this. How does that even get started? Can't we go to that source, or do we have to go through the political way and just put a million gazillion letters to Vice President Pence so that the president knows, and to our senators? In the political environment that's going on right now, that's an uphill, and there's not enough people just in this town to be able to, have, that kind of an influence. I mean, in my mind, because of everything else that's all going on. Is there no other way to fight this at its source?
There may be other ways. I think that's the best way. The president we have now of the United States. Sorry. There may be other ways to try to short circuit this idea of establishing a population of 200 grizzly bears in central Washington. I think politically the best way to do it is to the two addresses I mentioned, because as of last month, the Secretary of the Department of Interior's office in Washington, D.C. was not aware that the Central Woolley office was reopening comments on that plan to reintroduce grizzly bears here. So they were upset that Central Woolley went ahead without Washington, D.C. knowing it. Our President of the United States right now is very supportive of states' rights and the rule of the local people. So we've got our county commissioners here from Chelan County, Okanagan County, Skagit County, that are all against this. And from my political knowledge that I have a little bit of, I don't believe that President Trump will go against what the county commissioners want. So we can argue biology all we want with a Fish and Wildlife Agency, and they're just going to shove us the biology under the table and ignore that. Politically, I think that's the way we do it. That's our best angle. We've already tried it biologically. That doesn't seem to work.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
So with that, if there's any additional questions, Paul says he's going to hang around for a little bit. We'll be here for a little bit. So we do appreciate you coming out tonight and watching the food hearing. You were given a sticker. There are 4 options back there. Please feel free to put it on the option you feel best. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, all right. No.
All right, that concludes the formal portion of tonight's meeting. I'm here with Chelan County Commissioner England, and first I want to get your opinions how everything went tonight. What were your thoughts?
It was nice to see such a large crowd here. Such a large crowd here that were willing to express their opinion. We hope it doesn't stop with that. As we tried to explain, they need to go ahead and write the letters, make the comments pertinent, and send the comments to the addresses we've talked about. We feel it is a very dramatic concern, and it's very, very important to follow through, not just feel good because you vented today. And it appears, I think we have a number of people convinced that they will do that, and we hope they'll follow through.
Any surprises in what you heard tonight? I take it probably not.
No real surprises. There's a lot more information we could have put out, but it would have taken forever. I had been told that there were going to be some people here that were very pro-bear, and I don't know if they changed their mind or whether they decided not to come, but we'll find that out probably in some of our additional meetings. There will be another meeting October 1st in Wenatchee. There's also a very, very important meeting in Okanagan with Representative Newhouse. At that meeting, the Forest Service is going to present the whole program, and that will be one that will be very important to have their input there. And they're hoping to have over 1,000 people at that meeting, and so we would like to encourage some of the people even that attended today to be up there.
Now, a week from tonight at Wenatchee, my understanding it's pretty much going to be the similar meeting to this one.
Yeah, we will present exactly the same things. Paul will drive over from Montana again as a volunteer, and we'll just continue forward.
There were some folks watching the live stream, Doug, live that were pro-bear, and we're making comments throughout tonight. We will be posting this video up in its entirety on our website, lakechelannow.com, after we get it uploaded to YouTube. So folks that maybe didn't have a chance tonight or couldn't make the meeting in person, they can go ahead and watch it in its entirety, and maybe you'll catch some of those comments that were coming in tonight on the feed.
Yeah, I will look at those, but I would also have to emphasize that we are also pro-bear. And I think that you take such a magnificent animal, put it in a place that it has chosen, it has visited and chosen not to stay, that you're doing nothing more than condemning it.
All right, Doug, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's County Commissioner Doug England, as we are going to not wrap up our live coverage here because we've got a familiar face from the Stehekin Valley. Good evening, Mr. Courtney. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Now, you had some interesting comments tonight. I know you were concerned you didn't have enough time, perhaps. Anything you didn't get across that you'd like to say right now as we're still live on the broadcast here?
Well, I respond to questions and stuff better than I do just being put on the spot. But yeah, it's an issue that folks in Stehekin are keenly interested in. And like I said, we're entirely driven by the tourist dollar. And we get along with wildlife. We manage our bear problems wisely. And, the black bear is sometimes a nuisance, but mostly a wonderful creature in nature. And mostly you can keep from having problems if you manage your food sources correctly. But a grizzly is a whole different animal, and they're trying to pretend like, it's just a bigger version of a black bear. It really isn't. But I really worry about what it's going to do to the whole balance of things if you put something like a grizzly bear right in the middle of it, and what it's going to do to the black bear, what it's going to do to our mule deer, what it's going to do to the elk, and not just tourism in our livelihood, but the whole ecological balance. And I don't think it's well thought out, and I think there's a lot of soft pedaling going on, trying to do like they always do to get something through. And right now we're just being processed. That's the way I feel, that we're really not being listened to. And I think we're going to have to boldly go to high offices and tell them what we really think of introducing the grizzly bear into this ecosystem at this time, where and how they plan on doing it. So alternative A is definitely what we believe in. Let nature take its course. If the grizzly bear decides it's likes our habitat, then that should be its right to move in. But don't introduce them. And so I think that's where we stand on the subject, pretty firmly.
Now, I know you've got a small full-time population there in the Stehekin Valley, 80, 90 people or thereabouts, but have you had a chance to sit down with many of your neighbors and friends up there prior to this meeting and kind of get a consensus of how folks are feeling?
You know, we really didn't hold any community meetings to really take a stand on it as far as numbers, and I didn't get the chance to read all of the input that came from Stehekin, so I can't speak for Stehekin. I can certainly speak for, I think, the members of our family and the folks that I rub shoulders with in the business community, but I wouldn't dare speak for the community.
Will you go back, though, and pass along some of this information, and including the advice that perhaps the best course of action is to go to higher-ups, like the vice president, for example?
Yeah, I think, and I'll certainly take those addresses home and share this with the family and other folks in the business community, yeah.
All right, thanks for your time.
All right, thank you for giving me a chance.
All right, that will officially wrap up our live coverage here from the Chelan Senior Center. Interesting meeting. And again, we'll be posting this up on our Facebook page. We'll be posting it up actually on our website, LakeChelanNow.com. We'll be uploading it to the YouTube video platform and then putting it on our website. And you can tell friends if they didn't get a chance to see it live or attend the meeting in person, they can catch it in its entirety on LakeChelanNow.com. For now, Dennis Rahm, thanks for watching.